Welcome to the Interprise University. In the last part of this exercise, we will learn how to install both client and server components on the same machine. The client component consists of the Interprise Suite application itself. When installing in any server or workstation, we have an option to include or exclude the client or server component. The server component consists of several subcomponents: the demo database, business service, postal code values, shopping cart, eShop connector, and email service manager. When installing in any server or workstation, we have the option to include or exclude any or all components. In the previous part of this exercise, we learned how to install the server components on a server machine and how to install the client components on the workstation. We will now demonstrate installing both components in one machine. We are assuming that this is the first time you are installing. We are also assuming that you have checked for the hardware requirements and have installed the software prerequisites prior to installing both client and server components. Note that the installer will detect the missing software components, then download and install them before proceeding with the actual installation. We discussed the system requirements needed in the client or server installation in the previous exercise. We will simulate installing both client and server components of Interprise Suite for the first time. On the machine, run the Interprise Suite installer. The installer will verify the contents and detect the missing prerequisites in the machine, if any. If prompted to install missing prerequisites, continue with the user process, and the installer will connect to the internet to download and install the requirements. After this, we can proceed with the installation. Click Next to continue. In the next page, we may review or copy the licensing agreement. As a precaution, the user will be reminded to close all applications before continuing. Then click the checkbox to accept the terms of licensing. Click Next to continue. Here, we see two components to install, the client and the server components. When installing the client component, select the client component, then set to installer to install the entire feature. We will find several subcomponents under the server components. We will discuss briefly what each component is used for. First is the database component, which consists of the demo database used during the Interprise Suite application for the first time use, and the model database used as a template for new company databases. This is a required component and must be installed locally on the machine. When installing just the databases, select the database component under server component, then set to installer to install only the selected feature. We may optionally include the other server components, otherwise they may be installed later. The business service components allows the connection of remote clients to the server via internet. To successfully install the web service component, we need to have Internet Information Services installed and running in the server machine. After installing the business service, it must be configured to enable database connection through internet. We will discuss web service configuration in the next lesson. The postal code component includes additional postal code values for Canada and Australia. The email service component automates the sending and retrieving of messages from the email server to the company database and sending mass emails to its respective target list. After installing the email service component, we will configure the email service through the email service manager. We will discuss email service manager configuration in the email and fax lesson of the CRM module course. The e-commerce component includes the shopping cart solution or the e-commerce module and live chat for web store chat support. After installing the e-commerce component, it must be configured to enable the web store connection to the database. We will discuss this more in the web store setup and configuration in the e-commerce module course. The eShop Connect component enables the e-commerce component to connect with other shopping cart solutions or a global marketplace. To enable this functionality, we will need to speak with a Larian company representative. After installing the eShop Connect, we will need to configure it in the Internet Information Services. We will discuss this more in the web store setup and configuration in the e-commerce module course. When installing the server components, we can select subcomponents to include into installation or include all. In this simulation, we will install all the server components. Let's set the installer to install the entire feature and include all features. Click Next to continue. We will be asked where to put the installation files that will be downloaded. On the download path field, we can browse or paste a directory or location in the machine where we want to install the component. Click Next to continue. In the next page, we will be asked to provide the SQL Server instance where the server components will be installed. Since we are setting up the server components in the same machine, we will select the server instance in the machine where we're currently running the installer. Note that connecting to a remote server instance to install the server components is not allowed. We can let the Interprise Suite installer download and install the SQL Server application. If we have not done so before installing Interprise Suite, when installing the SQL Server application and creating the server instance, we will need to provide a server instance name and choose an authentication method. If we will connect to other company databases over the internet, the SQL Server instance will also be used to house the cache database needed in connecting via internet. Also, we must set the installer to include the business service component from the previous page. In the next page, we will select the instance name and select the authentication used in the server. Click Next to continue. If we choose to install the business service component, the next step will be setting up of the web service. We will be asked to install the web service on the local host of the workstation computer. By default, this is set to the default website running on the Internet Information Services. We can provide another website to install the web services, so given that the website exists and runs in Internet Information Services of the machine. Click Next to continue. Once the installer detects the website to install the web services, we will be brought to the next page. Otherwise, we need to check if Internet Information Services is installed and running or that website we provided exists. In the next page, we will be asked to set the name of the Start menu group and if the desktop shortcut will be created for all users or only the current user in the workstation. Click Next to continue. Click Next to proceed with the installation. At this point, the installer will begin downloading components and install them on the machine. We will be prompted on every progress and any error encountered in the download and installation. When finished, we can choose to exit the setup or run the Interprise Suite application. The next step is to log into the Interprise Suite application using the default configuration. We can also configure the user access of other workstations that will connect to the machine. We will discuss this in detail in the next lesson. Thank you for watching. In the next lesson, we will learn how to configure the Interprise Suite application to connect to the databases via LAN or internet connection.